Have you ever wondered what happens when you read a book that was never meant to be opened? The Curse of the Old Book is a haunting tale of a young woman searching for her missing brother, only to discover that some stories write back. Whispers in the pages, blood-inked rituals, and mirror reflections that don't quite follow. This is not just a horror story. This is a warning, because once you start reading, you vanish. Chapter 1: The Library That Time Forgot. Rain whispered against the rooftop, a steady patter, like the soft tapping of fingers against a coffin lid. The streets of Greystone were empty, slick with rain and silence, as though the town itself held its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled a dull, lifeless sound, swallowed almost instantly by the thick mist that blanketed the night. Evelyn Harrow pulled her coat tighter around her and stared at the wrought iron gate before her. It groaned under the weight of age and rust as she pushed it open. Creak! The sound pierced the stillness like a scream in a cathedral. Beyond the gate lay the Greystone Municipal Library, a crumbling relic of a forgotten era. Ivy curled around its stone pillars like veins around a corpse. Its windows were blackened, its doors chained until recently. And yet, just last week, a letter had arrived at Evelyn's university office. It was unsigned, yellowed with age, and smelled faintly of ash. If you seek the truth about the missing, the book is waiting. Come alone. Midnight, Greystone Library. Evelyn was not one to indulge in superstitions, but the letter had stirred something deep inside her. It was about her brother, Thomas, who vanished 10 years ago without a trace. A bright literature student, obsessed with rare manuscripts, Thomas had come to Greystone for research and was never seen again. Now, with only the glow of her flashlight and the relentless drizzle for company, Evelyn entered the library. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and ancient paper. Dust danced like spirits in the beam of her flashlight. The main hall loomed before her, rows of bookshelves stretching toward a ceiling hidden in shadow. She moved cautiously, boots echoing on the marble floor. Thud, thud, thud. She paused. That wasn't her. The sound came again, a slow, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. She swung her flashlight toward the noise, but saw nothing. Just a broken desk, an overturned chair. "Hello?" she called, her voice thin and uncertain. It died quickly in the vastness. The scrape ceased. She shook her head. "Just rats," she muttered. But even she didn't believe it. Near the back of the library, she found it, the Special Collections Room. A rusted plaque hung crooked above the door, its letters barely legible. The door was unlocked. The air changed the moment she entered. Colder, heavier. Books here were older, leather-bound, many chained to their shelves. Her flashlight flickered as she walked the aisles. Then, at the far end, she saw it. A single book lay on a pedestal beneath a glass case. Unlike the others, it bore no title. Its cover was dark, the leather cracked and discolored, as though burned. Intrigued, Evelyn approached. The glass slid open at her touch without resistance. A soft click echoed, then silence. as if the entire library had paused to watch her. She picked up the book. The moment her fingers touched it, the lights in the library flared to life with a violent buzz. Bzzzt! Then silence again. Evelyn blinked. The book trembled in her hands. It opened by itself. Flap, 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 flap. The pages turned with unnatural speed before stopping abruptly at the center. There, etched in dark red ink, no, blood, was a name. Thomas Harrow. Her heart slammed against her ribs. No! The ink began to bleed, dripping down the page. A whisper rose in the air, soft at first, then louder. He read. He knew. He vanished. The voice was many voices, male, female, old, young, all overlapping in a chorus of despair. He read. He knew. He vanished. She slammed the book shut. The whispering stopped. Suddenly, a scream tore through the silence. A man's scream, agonized, echoing from deep within the library. Ah! Evelyn dropped the book, heart racing. "Thomas?" she cried. No answer, but the sound had come from below. She found a stairwell hidden behind a shelf, leading down. The flashlight flickered again, then died completely. She cursed under her breath. A dim light now pulsed from below, greenish, sickly. The walls were covered in words, names etched into the stone. Some were centuries old. She ran her fingers over one. Eleanor Black, 1862. Then another, Daniel Cross, 1911. So many names, so many vanished. And then she saw his. Thomas Harrow, 2015. Her breath caught. Suddenly, crack, a loud snap echoed behind her. She turned. A tall, twisted figure stood at the top of the stairs. Its eyes glowed dimly. It did not breathe. It did not speak. It only watched. Then it began to descend, step by step. Each one creaked beneath its weight. Creak, thud. Creak, thud. Evelyn backed away, hands scrambling for anything to defend herself. She grabbed a loose stone from the wall and hurled it. It passed through the figure like mist. The creature whispered, "Read and be one with us." Then it lunged. When Evelyn awoke, she was back in the special collections room. The book was gone. The lights were off. Rain still tapped gently against the windows. But something was different. She stood, dazed. Her hand reached for her phone. No signal, no time. The device displayed only one word, "Read." And on the wall behind the pedestal, a new name had been carved. Evelyn Harrow, 2025. Chapter 2. The Whispering Pages. Rain had turned to sleet by the time Evelyn stumbled back to her motel room. Her clothes were damp, her boots caked in mud from the library basement, and her breath fogged up the cracked mirror above the sink. Her hands trembled as she tried to remember the events that led her back here, but memory came in fragments. The twisted figure, the staircase lined with names, the book that bled, the scream. She clutched her head and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady her thoughts. Then she froze. The book was on the nightstand. She hadn't brought it. She'd left it in the special collections room. She was sure of it. But there it was, the same scorched leather cover, pulsing faintly under the dim motel light, like a thing alive. Tap, tap, tap. Her eyes darted to the window. Nothing. Whoosh! A soft whisper floated through the air, so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind, except the window was shut tight, and the heater was broken. She leaned forward slowly. "Hello?" No response, just the silence. And then a sound like paper dragging across paper. The book was opening by itself. Pages fluttered like wings, stopping on a blank sheet. Then a single line of text began to form, etched by an invisible hand in a trembling ink-like script. Page by page, the soul unravels. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. The air in the room grew thick, pressing against her chest like a weight. Her breath quickened. She reached out, slowly, hand hovering just above the page. The paper was cold, far colder than the room, and pulsed like a heartbeat. Then the whispering returned, louder, and this time distinct, multiple voices. Layered atop one another, male, female, children, elderly, all speaking at once. "Read and remember, read and forget, read and disappear." Evelyn slammed the book shut. The whispers stopped immediately, as if cut with a knife. She stumbled back, knocking over the chair. Her ears still rang with the chorus of voices. At 2:13 a.m., the room phone rang. Ring! A shrill sound in the otherwise dead silence. She stared at it. Her cell still had no service, no Wi-Fi, and the motel manager hadn't even mentioned a landline. Yet it rang. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, she answered. "Hello?" Static. Then, a woman's voice, faint and cracked, as if speaking through water. "You shouldn't have opened it. Who is this?" He read it too, and now he's gone. "Thomas?" No answer. Just more whispering, then the line went dead with a loud click. Evelyn stood frozen, the receiver still pressed to her ear, when a deep, groaning creak came from the bathroom door. It was ajar. She hadn't closed it. She turned. The mirror above the sink was fogged over. Letters were forming in the condensation. Slowly, deliberately. Page 73. She stepped back. Her knees buckled as she fell onto the bed. The book now lay open again, and it was on page 73. The room was completely silent. No wind, no outside traffic, just the sound of her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. She crept toward the book. The words on the page were written in blood-red ink, identical to the name she saw in the library. She read until her eyes turned black. Her voice was taken, her face forgotten. But she read, and so she remains. Underneath it, a name, Anna Whitlow, 1878. A high-pitched giggle echoed from inside the room, childlike, echoing. Yet there was no one there. Evelyn spun around. Nothing. Then her gaze shifted back to the book. The ink on the page dripped, staining the sheet beneath. And then a scream from just outside the window. "I thee! Oh!" A woman, desperate, agonized. Evelyn rushed to the curtains and yanked them aside. No one there. But the scream lingered in the air like smoke. She turned again. This time, The mirror was not fogged, it was dark. The reflection showed her room, but not her. Instead, a small girl stood there, pale, hair matted with grime, lips sewn shut. She raised her hand and pointed at Evelyn through the glass. And the whispering returned, louder than ever. Read, 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 read. Then the mirror shattered with a deafening crash, sending glass across the floor. Evelyn screamed and stumbled back. She grabbed her coat, shoved the book into her bag without thinking, and ran out of the room. The hallway was deathly quiet. She banged on the motel office door. No response. She peered inside. The clerk sat slumped in his chair, mouth agape, unmoving. A loud buzzing sound filled the air, like a broken fluorescent light. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She turned back toward her room and stopped cold. Every door in the hallway was open. Inside each room, shadows moved, not people shapes, elongated, twitching, watching, and each room echoed the same whisper in unison, "Turn the page." Evelyn bolted for the exit, shoving open the door into the rain. The cold slapped her skin like needles. She didn't look back, not until she reached the woods. Only then did she stop to breathe. The motel behind her looked quiet again. No lights, no whispers. The book still pulsed in her bag, as if alive. She collapsed to her knees under a tree, rain soaking through her clothes. She pulled the book out, ready to throw it into the darkness, but the page had already changed. New text was forming, her own handwriting. She ran into the woods, but the forest already knew her name. She dropped the book. Her breath caught in her throat. Then from the forest, a voice echoed, not from the book, from ahead. "Evelyn." It was Thomas. "Read to me." She turned toward the voice and saw him, pale, hollow-eyed, half smiling. "Read," he whispered, "so I can remember who I was." She stepped back. "Thomas, I'm trying to find you. I want to help you." "You already did," he said, voice thick and distorted. "You opened the door." A rustling in the trees. Figures surrounded them now. Dozens, eyes glowing, whispering. The book lay open at her feet, the wind turning the pages rapidly. Then silence. Only one word remained, burned into the final page. Next. Chapter 3. Vanished without a trace. The woods around Evelyn Harrow had gone still, unnaturally still. No rustle of leaves, no chirp of crickets, no wind. Only the sound of her heartbeat, loud and irregular, thudding in her ears like fists against a locked coffin. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the darkness. "Thomas," she whispered. But the voice that had called to her was gone. The figure she had seen, pale, hollow-eyed, vanished like mist through the trees. She clutched the cursed book to her chest, its weight somehow heavier than before, like it was absorbing her fear. Then, snap! A branch cracked just behind her. She spun around. Nothing, just dense fog rolling between the trees like silent waves. Then another sound, a slither, low and wet, as if something was crawling across dead leaves. It moved around her in a slow circle, never quite visible, only audible. Scrape, shuffle, scrape. She backed away, her boots crunching against the undergrowth, until her foot hit something solid. She looked down. A man's shoe, half buried in mud. Her breath caught. She knelt and pulled at it. It came free with a soft squelch, and something came up with it. A decomposing hand, skeletal fingers curled like claws. Evelyn staggered back and fell, barely muffling her scream. The body was almost fully hidden, swallowed by the earth. But even in death, the face was unmistakable. Professor Leonard Klein. She had seen his photo during her research. He had vanished in 1996 while investigating the Greystone Library's occult history. And now he lay here, under a thin layer of dirt, as though the woods had tried to eat him. A faint rustling rose from the trees, then a low moan. Not the wind. A voice. One by one, we are swallowed. The moan turned into a whisper, then a chorus. Swallowed, forgotten, vanished. Evelyn clamped her hands over her ears, but the sound wasn't outside. It was inside her head. She ran. Branches lashed at her face. Thorns tore her sleeves. She didn't stop until the woods gave way to asphalt. She had reached the edge of town. The Greystone sign stood crooked by the road, rusted and barely legible. She doubled over, panting, and looked up. A building loomed nearby the Greystone Police Department, its lights dark, but the door slightly ajar. Inside, the station was empty, abandoned. Paper scattered the floor. A broken clock on the wall blinked 12 o'clock. Over and over again, the air smelled of mildew and something faintly coppery blood. Evelyn moved through the space slowly, flashlight flickering as she swept through the darkened halls. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice echoed through the station. No response. She passed the holding cells empty. The interrogation room doors open, chairs overturned. But then, in the back of the station, she found the evidence room, and inside, a folder with her brother's name. Thomas Harrow, Missing Person Report, 2015. She opened it with trembling fingers. There were photos, his university ID, a few notes, a page torn from a notebook. The book doesn't just tell stories, it feeds on the reader's memories. Each time I read it, I forget something. A birthday, a name. My reflection looks more and more like a stranger. Beneath it, in red ink, page 104 is where they vanish. Then a sound behind her, a soft creak. She turned. A figure stood in the doorway, uniformed, an officer. His badge read Sergeant Dawson, but something was wrong. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice monotone. Evelyn took a step back. I didn't mean to trespass. I was just... "You're looking for the missing." His voice didn't rise or fall. It was like a recording. "Yes," she said slowly. "My brother." He tilted his head. "They all read it," he whispered. Then, without warning, his mouth opened wider than humanly possible. From it came a sound like shattering glass, mixed with distant screams. "Ah!" Evelyn screamed and ran. The door slammed behind her. The windows burst in as dozens of pages flew in on the wind, each page blank, until they hit the floor and filled with names, each one a person who had vanished. She didn't stop running until she reached the library again. She had no choice. The answers were there. The front doors were still open. The same rotten air greeted her as she stepped inside. But now, the whispering voices didn't wait. They were everywhere. Page 104, page 104, page 104. She returned to the special collections room. The book lay waiting on the pedestal, open, page 104. She hesitated, then looked. There were photos, candid, eerie black and white photographs of people just before they vanished. One was of Thomas, in the library, standing right where she was now. But in the background of the photo, barely visible, was a figure, tall, cloaked, faceless. Evelyn looked around the room. The same pedestal, the same window, but no one there. She flipped the page. The next was blank. Then ink began to form. A drawing. Her. Standing in the special collections room, eyes wide, book open. Then, behind her, the same cloaked figure. She turned. He was there. In the corner of the room, unmoving, breathing, or not breathing. A soft hiss, like escaping steam, came from under the hood. She stepped back. Creak! The floorboard behind her shifted, and Evelyn fell through. She hit the ground hard. Basement. No light, just damp air and echoing whispers. Welcome back. She stood slowly. Her flashlight was broken. But a faint, pulsing light came from deeper in the hall. As she moved forward, the walls began to pulse, not with light, with breath. They expanded and contracted, like lungs, like something alive. Names glowed on the walls, etched in blood. And then she saw it. A room lined with mirrors, but the reflections were wrong. Not her. Other people. People trapped inside the glass, banging, screaming, but making no sound. One of them was Thomas. His mouth moved, eyes wide with terror. She stepped closer. He pressed a hand against the glass. She mirrored him. Suddenly, a deafening scream filled the hallway. Get out! The glass cracked. The book fell from her bag and slammed open. A vortex of pages and wind spiraled around her. The mirrors shattered, sending ghostly images flying into the darkness. A voice rose above the chaos. You read it, now you are written. When Evelyn opened her eyes, she was in her motel room. The lights were off. The mirror was whole again, and on her arm, a new mark, a page number, 105. She turned to the nightstand. The book lay there, closed, but on the cover, etched deep, she vanished without a trace. Chapter 4. Ink That Bleeds. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the world felt off, like a book page printed with a faint misalignment, just enough to make everything feel wrong. She was back in her motel room, again, but it wasn't the same. The curtains didn't move, even though the window was open. The clock on the wall was stuck at 3:03 a.m., ticking, ticking, but never changing. And the book? It sat on the nightstand like it never left, closed, but oozing something dark from its edges. At first, Evelyn thought it was ink, but the smell said otherwise. Copper, wet, warm, blood. She stepped closer. The black leather cover was pulsating softly, like breathing. Veins of red threaded beneath its surface, like capillaries under pale skin. She reached out with hesitant fingers and touched it. The moment her skin made contact, a warm wetness spread under her hand. She recoiled. A long, sticky smear of crimson coated her palm. She backed away and wiped her hand on the motel sheets, only to see the red soak through the fabric, still pulsing. Then, with a sudden rustle, the book flung open by itself. Flop, 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 flop. Pages turned wildly before stopping on one in the middle. Page 106. Blood leaked from the words, trailing down the page, dripping onto the floor in slow, measured drops. Plink, plink, plink. And as the drops hit the wooden boards beneath her feet, they began to sizzle, burning tiny black holes. Then came the sound again, that horrible, whispering chorus. Soft at first, then louder, layered, desperate. Read the blood! Read the blood! Read the blood! Evelyn backed into the wall, hands over her ears. No, she whispered, not again. But it wasn't just whispering now. The letters themselves were moving. They slithered across the page like worms, rearranging themselves. A new sentence formed, written in pulsing red. Blood remembers, ink forgets. Then a second line just beneath it. To change the ending, you must bleed the truth. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the room. The lights overhead burst with a pop. The room went dark. Evelyn fumbled for her flashlight, but it didn't work. Only the dim red glow from the book lit the space now, casting long shadows across the room. And from the shadow, something moved. A wet, dragging sound. Like bare feet across tile. Shaluk, shaluk, shaluk. She turned toward the bathroom. The door slowly creaked open by itself. Inside, the mirror was covered in dripping blood, but it wasn't her reflection staring back. It was Thomas, but wrong. His face was pale, drained of color. His eyes were black voids, mouth sewn shut with ink-drenched thread. He raised one hand and began scratching words into the mirror with his fingernail. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was unbearable, like metal against bone. Evelyn stepped closer. Words formed in shaky, uneven lines. He bled. So must you. Suddenly, Thomas looked up and screamed without opening his stitched mouth. Murmur, no. The mirror cracked once, twice, then shattered entirely. A gust of wind burst from the bathroom, scattering pages from the book across the room. One struck Evelyn's cheek, slicing her skin. She gasped and pressed a hand to the cut. Blood smeared her palm. Then the whispering returned, but this time the voices were inside the walls. Bleed, bleed, bleed. Evelyn stumbled out of the motel and into the fog-drenched night. The sky was starless, the moon gone. Only the red glow from the book in her hand lit her path as she wandered aimlessly down the street. Signs flickered in and out of visibility. Shadows moved just outside her vision. Then a sound behind her. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. She turned. No one. She ran. Past closed shops, past dark houses with broken windows, past a playground where the swings moved without wind. Until she reached it. Greystone Church. Its tall steeple leaned slightly to one side. The front doors stood open. Inside, the sanctuary was silent, dust drifting like ash. through air that smelled of wax and decay. Dozens of old Bibles lined the pews, and in the center aisle, a trail of blood leading to the altar. Evelyn followed it. There on the altar, sat another copy of the book, but this one was entirely red, bound in dried, cracked leather that looked human. Words moved across the cover like veins beneath skin. She opened it. The pages were wet. Every word seemed to squirm under her gaze. And there, at the center, page 121, was a passage written in thick, smeared blood. Write your name in blood, or lose your name forever. She turned the page. Her name was already half written. Evil. Before she could react, a figure rose from behind the altar, cloaked, faceless, the same as the one from the library. It pointed at her. Then, in a voice made of wind and bones, "Finish the name." Evelyn screamed and ran. The church shook behind her. Bells overhead began to ring, clang, 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 but the sound was warped, distorted, like the bells were underwater. The book burned in her hands. She dropped it, but when it hit the ground, it didn't bounce. It sank, as if the earth itself opened to swallow it. She turned and fled into the night. Back in her motel room, somehow she awoke hours later, but the book, it was still there, waiting. On the mirror, a new phrase written in dried ink. Ink that bleeds cannot be burned. And on her arm, a fresh cut, but not from the mirror, not from glass. It was shaped like a quill pen. Chapter 5. The Author Who Was Never Born. Evelyn Harrow hadn't slept for days. Or maybe she had, but in the kind of dreams that left you more tired than before. The kind of dreams that breathed, that whispered while you slept, that waited for you when you opened your eyes. She sat at the edge of her motel bed, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her skin was pale, her eyes rimmed with red, and on her arm, where the ink-shaped wound had appeared, something new had begun to form. Words, faint, fragmented like letters bleeding through from another page. Chapter 5. The Witness. Then came a knock at the door. Not a pounding, just 3 slow, deliberate taps. Knock, knock, knock. She froze. No one should know she was here. Cautiously, she opened the door. An old man stood outside, dressed in a dark wool coat, hunched beneath the weight of decades. His eyes were covered with a black silk blindfold. "I felt it," he said. His voice was gravel, like dry pages being torn slowly. "The book has chosen you." Evelyn didn't answer. "I used to hear the pages turn in my sleep," the man continued. "Now I just hear them screaming." "Who are you?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Name's Calder Gray. I'm the last person in this town who met the author." "The author?" "The one who wrote the book, or rather, the one the book wrote into being." Evelyn stepped aside and let him in. Something about him felt wrong, but also right, like he was part of this, like he always had been. Gray sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped over his lap. "You think this started with your brother?" he asked. "Thomas was only the latest. There were many before him. All of them touched the book. Some tried to destroy it. Others tried to read it through. But one thing's always the same. He lifted one hand. His fingers were missing from the knuckles down. The book always takes. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Why me? Why now? He tilted his head toward her, blind eyes hidden beneath the silk. Because you opened it. And once the story starts, it needs an ending. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilskin. It was a journal, old, worn, the cover marked with ash and burn scars. I kept notes, he whispered, before the ink took my eyes, before my name was erased from every record in town. Evelyn opened the journal carefully. The pages were full of nonsensical symbols, broken sentences, and horrifying sketches. Eyes without pupils, a library that stretched into blackness, a man without a face made of swirling letters. I met him once, Gray said, in a dream. That made Evelyn look up sharply. A dream? You'll have yours too, soon. And he was right. That night, Evelyn dreamed. She stood in a library without end. Bookshelves spiraled into the sky like cathedral spires. But none of the books had titles. They whispered as she passed, soft, desperate voices. Read me. Finish me. She turned a corner and entered a circular chamber lined with parchment. The walls breathed, pulsing softly. In the center was a desk made of bone and ink, and behind it sat him, the author. But he had no face, only blank parchment stretched over his skull like a mask, stitched together with quills. Ink dripped from his fingertips, pooling on the floor. He looked up, though he had no eyes, and he spoke not with a voice, but with a chorus of written phrases, all overlapping, rising from the pages themselves. You are the reader, the written, the pen, the page. I was not born, I was imagined. You opened the story. Now you must end it. The floor cracked beneath her feet, revealing a pit of writhing letters, black ink forming screaming mouths. Evelyn screamed and turned to run, but the pages wrapped around her legs, dragging her into the pit. She woke up gasping. The motel room was dark, her sheets soaked in sweat. And the book sat beside her again, open to a new chapter. Chapter 6, Mirror Chapters. But something else had changed. Her voice was gone. She clutched her throat, tried to speak. Nothing, only a dry rasp. The mirror across the room shimmered, and then Gray appeared within it, though he wasn't in the room. He looked at her with bleeding sockets and whispered, "The author writes in blood, and now you are the ink." Chapter 6, Mirror Chapters. The first thing Evelyn Harrow noticed when she awoke was the silence. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that presses against the eardrums like water at the bottom of a deep, endless lake. She sat up in bed, reached for her throat instinctively, and found it still there, raw and silent. Her voice hadn't returned. Her scream from the dream had never left her body. On the nightstand, the book waited. It had already opened to the next chapter. Mirror Chapters, written in a reflective ink that shimmered faintly, even in darkness. The letters looked like they were watching her. Evelyn turned her head slowly toward the mirror on the wall across from the bed. She saw her reflection and froze. It wasn't mimicking her. Her reflection was smiling. She wasn't. She rose cautiously, approaching the mirror as if it were a window to something else. Her reflection tilted its head. Evelyn did not. Then it raised a hand slowly, delicately, and pressed it flat against the inside of the glass. And on the other side, a whisper, a voice that matched hers perfectly. "We look alike, but I remember what you've forgotten." Evelyn stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. Glass shuddered. Crack. A thin fracture ran across the surface. From it, words began to bleed, dripping down like black ink mixed with something more organic. Dark red. She backed away. Crack! The mirror exploded inward, but no shards hit the floor. Instead, the broken pieces hung in mid-air, each one still reflecting a different version of Evelyn. One screaming in fire, one holding the book with a mad grin, one digging a grave, one slitting her own throat with a quill made of bone. Each version mouthed the same thing, in sync. "You are already written." Panicked, Evelyn ran into the bathroom and shut the door. But the mirror there was already fogged from the inside. A handprint pressed against it from the other side. Tap, tap, tap. 3 light knocks echoing like fingernails against glass teeth. Then came the sound of scratching. She leaned closer, squinting at the surface. Someone was carving words into the mirror with invisible claws. "Do not trust what looks back." She gasped, stepping back. The faucet beside her turned on by itself. Drip, drip, drip. But what came out wasn't water. It was ink, thick, dark, and churning, as if alive. It pooled in the sink, and within it formed words, like the page of a book. "He is watching through your eyes." Suddenly a shriek from the bedroom. She turned back just in time to see her reflection climbing out of the shattered mirror. Hands first, then face, then torso. Evelyn backed away as the other her stepped into the room. Its eyes were black, its mouth twisted into a smirk. And when it opened its lips, her own voice came out. "If I finish your story, I get to live. And you get to rot in the page." Evelyn ran. Down the motel stairs, into the cold night. The street lamps flickered above her, casting double shadows, each one moving just slightly out of sync. She headed toward the only place she could think of, the gray stone library. The door opened before she touched it. Inside, the lights were already on, and in the center of the main hall stood a row of mirrors, ones that hadn't been there before. Each reflected a different scene. Thomas, the figure without a face. Calder Gray, screaming as the ink took his eyes. She turned toward the special collections room and saw someone waiting in front of the pedestal. A man, back turned. His reflection, however, was facing her and smiling. She stepped forward. "Thomas?" The man turned. It was him, but he looked off, slightly transparent. Evelyn reached for him, her fingers trembling, and when she touched his arm, her surroundings melted. She was no longer in the library. She stood in a corridor of glass, mirrors stretching infinitely in every direction. Each one flickered like a television screen, showing different versions of her life, some real, some twisted. In one mirror, she never came to Greystone. In another, she found Thomas's body in the woods. In a third, she was the author, quill in hand, eyes hollow, laughing as she scratched out names. And behind her the whispering began, faint, then louder. Choose the truth. Choose the lie. Choose your story. She turned and saw him, the author, standing among the mirrors, his body made entirely of sentences, paragraphs wrapped around his limbs like chains, pages folded into wings that twitched and bled, his face blank parchment, still, yet screaming silently. He raised a finger made of bone and ink, pointed at Evelyn, and then he spoke. His voice was every character she'd read. Every line ever written in the cursed book. There can be only one version of you. The mirrors shattered all at once. Crash, crash, crash. A storm of glass and words rained down. Evelyn covered her face, but felt no pain, only cold. When she looked again, she stood alone in the library. The mirrors were gone. The book sat on the pedestal again, closed. But etched into its cover was a single phrase: "One Evelyn must remain." She looked at her reflection in the darkened library window and saw nothing. No face, no eyes, no her. She turned to run and slammed into a woman. She looked up and saw herself, smiling. You left the mirror open. Then everything went black. Chapter 7. The Ritual of the Final Page. Evelyn awoke to the sound of dripping. Plink, plink, plink. At first, it sounded like water, but when her eyes adjusted to the dim reddish glow around her, she saw the drops falling onto an open book. Not ink, but blood. She was no longer in the motel, no longer in the library. She stood in a cavernous space made of stone and paper, where the walls pulsed like veins and the air reeked of old ash and rotting parchment. The final archive. She realized the place that didn't exist on any map, where all cursed texts were buried, forgotten by history. But the book had brought her here. And it wanted her to finish the story. Before her stood a stone altar, and atop it, the book. Open, waiting. Surrounding the altar was a ritual circle, etched into the floor in dried blood, forming twisted symbols that seemed to rearrange themselves when she looked away. And there it was, the final page blank, nothing written. But Evelyn's hand began to tremble, because deep in her chest she knew the story would not end until it was written with her own blood. Then the whispers returned, not soft this time, loud, chanting, surrounding her. Write the end, write the end, write the end. The shadows thickened. Out from the stone columns emerged dozens of figures, all wearing the same faceless parchment mask. Some tall, some hunched. One of them held a quill pen made from bone. The handle gleamed ivory. The tip was razor sharp, still wet. They approached her slowly. She couldn't speak. Her voice was still gone. But the book didn't need her voice. It wanted her blood. As one of the masked figures handed her the quill, Evelyn's mind reeled. She looked at the final page. The empty space seemed to throb. Then it moved. Images began to emerge, not ink, but memory. A room, dusty, dim. A candle flickered on a table. A shadow hunched over the book. Thomas. Evelyn froze. She was witnessing the past, his final moments. He had found the final page, too, and he had tried to write in it. But the moment his hand pressed the quill to the page, the room around him began to shudder. The book resisted. Blood poured from his nose, his eyes, his fingertips. He screamed, "Evelyn, don't!" And then the page swallowed him. Not metaphorically. His body collapsed forward, spine arching unnaturally, mouth wide, in a silent, final scream. The book ripped him off the earth, page by page, until all that was left was blood and the words he never finished. To escape the curse, one must. Then nothing. Evelyn sobbed, falling to her knees. The masked figures began to chant louder. "Blood writes! Truth binds! End it! End it! End it!" She looked back at the final page. It was waiting. Her hands shook as she took the bone quill. She pricked her palm with it, sharp as obsidian. Blood welled up. The moment the crimson touched the page, the symbols glowed brighter. Then the floor trembled. Behind her, the shadows began to shift again, and they came. All the mirror versions of Evelyn. The fire-burned one, the grinning one, the one who killed, the one who replaced her. They stepped into the circle, whispering, surrounding her. "Only one of us can remain," Evelyn screamed, but no sound escaped her throat. They advanced. One of them lunged. Evelyn dropped to the floor, grabbed the book, and with her bleeding hand wrote, "I am the true Evelyn Harrow. The others are reflections. Let only truth remain." The book flared with light. The mirror Evelyns screamed in unison, "No! No!" Then burst into clouds of ink and bone, dissolving into the void. The circle on the floor began to spin violently. Pages tore from the walls. The masked figures dropped to their knees. A final whisper rose from the altar itself. "Finish it." Evelyn turned back to the final page, and she wrote, "The curse ends when the truth is written in sacrifice. I accept the truth. I am the author now." She stabbed the bone quill into the center of the page. A scream erupted, not hers, but the book's, 1,000 overlapping voices. Then silence. Evelyn opened her eyes. Morning light streamed through a window. She was back in her motel room. No blood, no ink. The mirror reflected her as normal. The book was gone, or so she thought, until she saw something new on her arm. A tattoo. A single line of elegant handwriting. Chapter 8. The Collector of Souls. Chapter 8. The Collector of Souls. Morning sunlight filtered through the motel blinds, warm and indifferent. For a moment, Evelyn Harrow believed she had escaped. The book was gone. No whispers, no blood, no mirror Evelyn grinning back at her. But then she saw it, etched onto her forearm, delicate, deliberate like calligraphy burned into flesh. Chapter 8, The Collector of Souls. And in that instant, she knew it wasn't over. Evelyn walked outside. The streets of Greystone were empty, silent, too silent. No birds, no wind. The sky was gray, thick like paper about to tear. As she passed a closed bookstore, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass, or what should have been her reflection. But the glass showed nothing, no face, no silhouette. She raised her hand. The reflection did not move. Then came the first whisper, not from the world around her, from within her. You wrote the page, now you carry the binding. Her veins pulsed black for a split second. She doubled over, gasping, and from the shadows behind her a voice. Evelyn. She turned. No one. Just a rustle, a dragging sound. Shff, shff, as if paper was being dragged across stone. Back in her motel room, Evelyn found the book on her bed again. Closed, bloodless, but trembling. She picked it up. Her hands began to leak ink from under the fingernails, and when the book opened, she saw it, a list of names, each line dripping, fading, screaming, as if written in the final moments of a soul. The ink on the page twitched, forming mouths. One name blinked, Calder Gray. She turned the page. His name vanished, gone, replaced by Soul Collected. The next night, Evelyn dreamt. She stood in a circular chamber, high walls lined with shelves made of bone, and on every shelf jars, each filled with flickering ink, each labeled with a name. The air was thick with murmurs, a chorus of trapped souls. Let us out! Let us go! Let us be forgotten. And then she saw him, Thomas. His jar glowed brighter than the rest, vibrating violently. He looked at her not with anger, but sorrow. His voice echoed from within the glass. You became what I feared. You wrote the ending, and it began with me. She tried to touch the jar, but it burned her skin, and from the darkness behind her, a figure approached tall, shrouded in robes made of shredded paper. Its face was a rotating vortex of pages, and its voice her own, layered and reversed. You are the collector now. There is no escape. She awoke choking. Blood seeped from the corners of her eyes. On the motel mirror, words appeared, scrawled in ink and ash. Write or be erased. Evelyn stumbled out into the night. Drawn by a force she couldn't explain, she returned to the library. It was different now. Not decayed. Alive, breathing. The walls pulsed like a heart. The floors wept ink with every step. She followed the trails of whispering toward the basement. There, waiting for her, was a single blank page, hovering in midair, glowing red. Beside it, a quill made from her own hair, bone, and a drop of blood. The book whispered in her mind, write the name, one per night, one per breath, and you remain. Stop writing, and you take their place. She refused, ran, but the book followed her. Pages burst from sewer grates. Names screamed through car radios. Graffiti wrote itself on the motel wall. Evelyn Harrow, collector, bound by blood. Her body began to change. She no longer cast a shadow. Words crawled beneath her skin, forming temporary sentences, then vanishing. And each time someone passed too close, she saw their name forming faintly on the next blank page. Then came the test. The book opened on its own. A name burned into the paper. Grace Elwood, 6 years old. A girl she'd passed in town. Innocent, smiling. The page began to pulse. Blood oozed from the margins. The whisper came, "Write her or take her place." Evelyn screamed this time. Her voice returned, but distorted like multiple voices at once. She dropped the book, but it floated, followed, screamed in Thomas's voice, "You promised me you'd break the curse." And then came a scream unlike any she'd heard. Not from her. Not from Grace. From the book itself. A sound made of teeth and ink, splitting the air like glass. "Aye!" The motel lights burst. Her reflection cracked, and her hand trembling lifted the quill. She closed her eyes and wrote not Grace's name, but her own. Evelyn Harrow released the bound. The book screamed, burned. The words on every page ignited. The names howled, but the chains shattered. One by one, the jars in her dreams exploded, and the last thing she saw before collapsing was Thomas, smiling, free. She woke up in a hospital bed. Doctors said she was found unconscious in the burned remains of the library. She said nothing, but on her arm, new letters etched themselves slowly, one word. The final chapter? Next. Step by step. Chapter 9. Burning Words. Evelyn Harrow opened her eyes to smoke. Not thick, choking smoke, but the kind that slithered across the air like burning paper, dry and laced with ash. She was still in the hospital, or what remained of it. The fluorescent lights above her flickered violently, emitting a faint zzzzt sound before sputtering out completely. In the silence that followed, she heard it, crackling, not from the walls, not from outside, from within the book. It sat on the table beside her bed, open. Its pages were on fire, but not with flames. The words themselves were burning, letters blackening, curling, hissing as they disintegrated. A single sentence twisted and vanished in a trail of smoke. Evelyn stumbled to her feet. "No," she rasped. Her voice had returned, but it sounded wrong, hollow. She reached for the book only for the heat to sear her fingertips. She jerked back. Blood bloomed in the shape of fingerprints across the hospital bedsheet. The book turned another page, and another sentence burned, and with it, reality shifted. The IV drip beside her flickered and vanished. The flowers in the vase next to her bed wilted instantly, then crumbled into dust. The world around her was burning, one sentence at a time. Evelyn ran. Down the hospital corridor, now cracked and steaming like the inside of an oven, she passed a nurse frozen mid-step, fading, her outline crumbling like an old photograph. On the wall, graffiti in burnt ink read, "Every word you wrote writes you back." The sprinkler system activated, but instead of water, ash. It rained down in silence. She burst through the exit doors and into the night. Greystone was on fire, but not the buildings, the stories. Shop signs faded away. Street names melted into meaningless symbols. People screamed, but their voices were muffled, as if their dialogue had been erased. Evelyn fell to her knees, gasping. She looked at her hands. Lines of text crawled up her arms, sentences she'd written, names she'd spoken, thoughts she never meant to speak aloud. And they were igniting, one by one. Then came the sound. Low at first, then louder. A slow, wet, dragging noise like scorched parchment being pulled across glass. From the end of the street, through the ashes, emerged a figure. Tall, slender. Its robes were smoke, its face a mass of burned pages, fused and pulsing. The ash scribe, Evelyn backed away. Its voice was like coals hissing under breath. You finished the story, but stories don't end, they burn. She shook her head. I freed them, Thomas, Calder, the others. You freed them from the page, but not the flame. The ash scribe raised a skeletal hand wrapped in scorched ink. Words peeled themselves off the ground and formed into flaming birds, circling around Evelyn. Each one screamed as it disintegrated midair. Please don't write me. Stop turning the page. Let me end. Evelyn covered her ears, but the voices were inside her now. Every story she'd read, every sentence she'd spoken. Every name she'd written, burning. Then one voice broke through, clearer than the rest. Evelyn! She turned. Through the smoke stood Thomas. But not as she remembered him. He was half ash, body flickering between form and ember. Thomas! You're not the reader anymore, he said. You're the spark. He reached for her, and when their hands touched, a new surge of fire rippled through her veins. She screamed, but not in pain, in memory. Every moment returned at once. Thomas reading the book, Evelyn arriving at Greystone, the mirrors, the whispers, the rituals, and one final truth. There was no first page. There never had been. Only a beginning that always burned. Thomas's face began to crumble. You have to go back, he said, voice breaking. Find the page that started the fire, Evelyn gasped. But how? Burn your name. What? Your name is the last chain. And then he was gone, blown away like dust in a draft. The book appeared before her again, hovering in mid-air, open to the first page, blank at last. But beneath it, faint and smoldering, was a single line beginning to form. Evelyn Harrow was never. She grabbed the quill. Blood poured from her fingertips, mixing with soot and ash. The page sizzled under her touch. She struck the page with the quill and wrote, Let the fire consume what was never meant to be told. Let the name fade. Let the story end. The book screamed. Not a whisper, not a cry, but a final, guttural, world-ripping scream, like every letter ever written was dying at once. Along! The streets shattered, buildings collapsed, the stars blinked out one by one, and in the center of it all, Evelyn stood still, burning, page by page. She awoke one last time in a field. No buildings, no town, only ashes blowing on the wind. The book lay beside her, blackened, silent, closed. She reached out to touch it, and it crumbled into dust. On her arm, for the first time, nothing was written. She whispered hoarsely, "Is it over?" A faint sound answered her, a whisper from the wind. To read is to vanish. Chapter 10. To read is to vanish. The wind whispered across the field, brushing through the ashes like 1,000 fingers turning invisible pages. Evelyn Harrow stood alone. The book was gone, crumbled to dust in her hands. Her name no longer written. No blood, no ink, no story, just silence. She turned slowly in the gray light of a world that felt thin, as if it had been printed too many times, and the paper was beginning to tear. And then footsteps. Behind her, crunch, crunch. She spun. It was Calder Gray. His eyes, once blind, now glowed with faint gold. His body was no longer twisted by the book's curse, but smooth and whole, reborn. "You burned it," he said softly. "I did," Evelyn whispered. Her voice sounded distant, faded, as though echoing from another room. "You freed us," she nodded. "Then why am I still here?" Gray tilted his head. "You're not." The wind stopped. So did the sound. Evelyn blinked. The horizon was gone. No clouds, no sun, just white, a blank page. "Where am I?" Gray didn't answer. He simply reached into his coat and pulled out a book. She knew it instantly. The leather, the ash-stained corners, the scent of fire, and just a single line written in careful script. To read is to vanish. And beneath it, author Evelyn Harrow. Her hands trembled. She flipped the page. Chapter 1. The Library That Time Forgot. Chapter 2. The Whispering Pages. All of it. Her story. She kept turning. Faster. Chapter 7, 8, 9, until she reached Chapter 10. This chapter. And the final paragraph was still being written. She saw the ink form one word at a time as she read. Evelyn turned the page. And with each letter, a piece of her disappeared. Her fingers faded first, then her voice, now silent forever. She dropped the book, looked down. Her fingers were gone. Her skin was turning translucent. "Gray?" she choked. But he was no longer there. Nothing was, only the sound of paper tearing, a slow, skin-crawling rip, sss, as if the air itself were coming apart. And from behind her came a whisper. The voice. The one from the beginning. The one behind the book. "You read, and so you vanish." Evelyn tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The world folded in on itself, sheets of reality peeling back to reveal only blankness beneath. Every step she took echoed like footsteps in a closed book. Tap, tap, tap. She screamed, but no sound emerged. Dot, dot, dot. Her scream had already been written, and it had already been erased. She fell to her knees. The book opened once more before her, glowing dimly. On the final page, only one line remained to be written. The page beckoned her. She reached for the pen, but it was already in her hand, made of her own bone, ink flowing from her eyes. With the last ounce of will, she wrote, "I was here." Silence. Somewhere in a dusty old library, a boy finds a strange, scorched book lying open on the floor. No title, no author, just 2 words written on the first page. "Read me." He smiles and begins to read.